Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an excellent game to share with you from round 2 of the 2025 European Chess Championship. This was played just today. On the white end, Daniel Dardha, playing against Evgenios Ioannidis. Alright, on board we have an Italian game, knight f6, and how to defend the pawn. White goes with d3. If you're defending with the knight, you're opening yourself up for that center fork trick. So it's d3. Bishop e7, both sides castle. Knight c3 only now. And once d6 is in there, e5 is now supported. Black has an eye next on hunting the bishop. So some room for this piece in the event of knight a5. Got a square. Follow up knight b4. So this is the first move. When I initially skimmed through it, it grabbed my attention. Seems a little odd. It does take advantage of the newly weakened b4 square. It's not quite a hole. There's still c3 that could challenge this piece, and in just a couple of moves we see just that. What is this? What's the idea behind knight to b4? Is this knight specifically doing anything exciting? Not really. This is about allowing the c-pawn to play a role, one way or another. So white's response here is an immediate knight to e2. So if you play a different move, let's say at this point white says, all right, now's the time to insert a flight square. Black could try to work with this knight post on b4. What do I mean by this? Well, it controls d5, so black may want to shoot for c6 and d5. Has enough support for that. But white is quick in this game to challenge this invasive piece. Plays knight to e2, and so now right around the corner there's c3. Black's response here is c5. Do know there are some sharp lines here. Black could consider still in this position c6, preparing to meet c3 with d5. We're in for a sharp middle game battle with a line like that. How it's played here, black goes 2 with the c-pawn. So there's a weakness now over the d5 square, but black now has a nice grip. In exchange for that weakness, has a nice grip over d4. At this point, c3, knight kicked back, and just improving a piece, knight g3, healthy move for black. Got the flight square, no jumps to g4, and from here, rook to e1. So black at this point makes the following move. He goes with king to h8. Difficult to really describe what's going on exactly with that move. Initially, I'm thinking you get off of this diagonal, but there doesn't seem to be that that consistent follow-up to king to h8. So I'm wondering if this is maybe in part some waiting move, waiting to see if white maybe tries to play in the center with the d4, or maybe only after h3 the bishop goes to e6. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with king to h8. One of the computer suggestions here, what it considers top, is bishop to e6, competing for that weakened d5 square. So I want to put this move on. With the move in the game, king to h8, we do see a shift in the evaluation, something close to plus 0.6, approaching +1 territory. It likes this one best, and one note I want to make about this move is that it carries a threat. There's some tactical options available to black once the bishop is in tension with the light square bishop. So for instance, if white in this position responds with my favorite passing move, h3, this is where we could see a trick available to black. Knight takes e4 is there. Preparing to meet pawn takes knight with bishop takes bishop. And bishop takes bishop with knight takes knight. In the case of the piece captures on e4, best move in this position is to take with the knight. In both cases, regardless of what piece captures on this e4 square, this is where black can follow through with the d5 and get that piece back. All right, how it's played in this one, we don't see this top move. It's instead king to h8. And from here we have bishop to d2. So with bishop d2, white has his eye on playing b4 and b5, dislodging this knight. Essentially, there's a fight going on over this d4 square. It wants to shoo this piece away and maybe then shoot for d4, only after this queen knight has been inconvenienced. Now, what would be the issue if white, instead of, let's say, bishop d2, plays in the center with d4? The issue is that in the end, after first capture here on d4, once the d4 square is identified as a whole, this is where black can now go ahead and throw this knight in a pretty irritating pin. And what's going to happen shortly from here, this tension will have to resolve now. If you play with d5, there's knight d4. Pretty uncomfortable situation for white to be in this pin. With a variation like this, white has space, but is this space with advantage? I don't think so. Because what's right around the corner would be a couple minor piece exchanges on this f3 square. Normally I view it where if there's a couple minor piece exchanges, having a pawn planted in enemy territory, maybe not seen as a great positive. So my point, d4 really doesn't give white anything. The try here is with bishop to d2. Computer also has its eye on supporting the b4 advance in a different way. It's leaning just a tick towards rook b1 instead. All right, in this one, bishop to d2, we're going to see that this bishop, not long from now, will end up taking a second step. This is maybe a reason to support this b4 advance with the rook. All right, how it's played here, bishop d2, we get a knight maneuver by black, cutting out any jump now, bishop post on g4. a6, once more the computer has its eye, even in this later position, on bishop to e6, but how it's played here, we have a6, b4, chop, chop, and knight to g5. I'd like to throw this one to you as a pop quiz. How would you respond here? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, top move here, we see bishop captures knight. If you go with knight captures knight, you would be playing in an inconsistent way. There's this, well, with this plan b4, b5, you would be giving up that fight over the d4 square. This is not a moment to just go for a knight for knight exchange and concede your control over this d4 square. You would really have nothing. This would be sort of a dream situation for black. In the end, this knight gets to camp out on d4. Not a good idea. This would be a perfect time to go ahead and invest the bishop for knight exchange. We're keeping this important defender around over the d4 square. We're still working to inconvenience this queenside knight. So it's bishop takes here on g5. This is the good bishop being exchanged for the knight, and it is fully justified because of this fight over the d4 square. Follow up, bishop takes bishop. Sure enough, we get b5 in there. And the knight in this game goes to a5. So if we consider the forward response, well, the central response, knight d4, taking on this structure right here, how to describe it exactly? It doesn't seem, it seems more so a negative than a positive. With this structural change, what might we know? e5 is now opened up for a piece for black, but what piece is going to function? on that e5 square anytime soon, and even if it's there, what wonderful thing is it doing exactly? Another thing we might look into is this invasive pawn and the squares it controls. It does eye this hole here on c3, but is there a way to really interact with this square here? Is there a way to put a black piece on c3? And even if that's possible, somehow, I'm not even quite sure how it's possible, what great things would it even be doing? So in short, taking on this structure here, not so appealing. So the try in this one is to keep the central structure as is. The knight goes to the edge, get the capture on a6. Now bishop d5, bishop b7 to defend. White simply increases the pressure. And now we have bishop takes on d5. So this structure here should look familiar. It's just that white now takes on these double isolated pawns. But in this case, it is a positive for white. Considering the newly vacant e4 square, we can easily see a piece function well for white on that square. Knight ready to improve there. That'd be the primary piece improvement rather than a rook. Knight e4 is looking good, and what's also looking pretty good is this hole that's now under white's control. It's not like white is going to plant a piece on c6. This is more of an irritant to black. This knight is now, well, it's on the edge, and it's pretty much going to have to stick around on the edge because of white's control over this square. So this becomes a great liability at this point. The computer at this stage is looking at this one as about +1. Very difficult game ahead now for black. The try from here, black goes with f5. Computer does not like this. If you try something different, computer's pointing out some bishop move. Preserve the bishop at this point. But even in these cases, bishop f4, knight h5 is a move. Computer's also saying on bishop f6, you can go forward with d4, increase the pressure here, and maybe the knight is granted access to the weakened c6 square in the end. Right, how it's played here, black goes with f5, cuts out, we might say, the knight jump to e4, but at the same time places a restriction on the rook. We'll see how this plays a role shortly. Not a comfortable situation to have the rook allocated to the defense of a pawn. This minor piece pressure on f5. Inconvenience here for black, having this piece as the defender. Follow up, knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, and now white gets to pounce on the newly weakened b6 square. Very active piece. Queen no longer defending this point. Problem here on d6, the queen has to now go back home to defend, but the rook doesn't have to go anywhere. Simply supported. The queen remains restricted. The knight is out of squares. Black is really tied up here, and there isn't a way to really challenge this rook. So in the game, rook c8 is played. What's right around the corner for white? This queen move is not just about defending the rook, but we're looking at queen b4, queen takes knight. Black gets in position to quickly defend the knight. Here's the thing. If black tries to remove the invasive rook with rook b8, how is this going to play out? Well, we're going to exchange rooks and exchange queens on the b8 square. In the end, the f8 rook has to recapture, and there you go. That f5 pawn is scooped up, and nearby the d6 pawn, Pac-Man knight. So the try from here is rook c8, rook c5. A pawn is up for grabs. It's a big pawn. We now have a passer. There's no counterplay for black. Follow-up from here is queen c7. If black scoops up the d5 pawn here, this rook can seize control of this open c-file. The rook is very awkward in the center. Black is still in a super restricted state, tethered to the defense of the a5 knight. It's queen c7 here. Follow up d5. So this is excellent. for multiple reasons. One, you're breaking up a duo, and two, you're extending the scope of this rook that's on the e-file. We get the capture on d4. If something else, if rook takes pawn here, white can take on e5, can't take back. If you take with the pawn, first of all, queen takes rook. And if you take with the rook, we first exchange rooks, and then we have this idea to swipe the rook. There's some knight c6 move here, but it's still saying in the end, white is for choice, close to a +2 advantage. How it's played here, d4, the response is the capture on d4, queen recaptures. There's now a pin. From here, knight b3. No progress really with these next two moves here. Knight b3, counterpunch against the knight. The knight returns. White's making progress. Queen, black queen now has a restriction here to defend the mate threat on g7. From here we see f4. A square opens up for the rook, maybe trying to dislodge this invasive knight. If something else is tried, for instance, knight c4 into e5, e5 isn't a stable square. It could be challenged with f4. So the try in this one after knight h5 is f4. Rook takes d6. About 4 minutes was spent on this move. Queen cannot take. It'll be checkmate. Before you pull this move off, you have to calculate something for sure. You have to calculate knight c4. Now, in the game, rook c3 is played. What would happen if knight c4? Well, there would be only one winning move. There is this fork here. That winning move is rook takes h6. So before playing this rook captures d6 move, this is a line what I'm putting on here. Dardha had to calculate this. He had to be prepared to be down a rook. So what am I talking about exactly? Well, queen is under fire, rook is under fire. White has this move, though, in this position, ready to enter here on h7. And in the event of the rook capture, this is a winning position. This will, in fact, lead to checkmate in just a handful. Note in this position, there's no time to block with the queen. The rook will fall. The king will soon fall. How is this playing out exactly? Well, in the end, this knight drops on f6, and these two are not in a position to defend the mate threat. Queen, in particular, going to the h-file. Next up, taking on h7 for mate. And if rook takes knight, we dive into that back rank and checkmate next. So white worked out all of those details before playing rook captures d6 right here. In the game, it's rook c3. Rook d7 deflects the queen. We're exchanging rooks with this sequence. Rook f5 now. In comes knight takes g7. You could, of course, go ahead and swipe the knight straight away, but why not track down a big pawn first? We see just that. Queen takes knight. Queen takes knight. And at this point, black resigns. White's up 3 pawns at this point. There's no attack against the white king. 2 passers to work with. Exposed black king. Perfect time to go ahead and resign. If this game continued with, let's say, f3, simplest would be to address the mate threat right away with g3. Don't try to get fancy here with a check on d8 because there's this punch that's thrown right back. In the event of f3, g3 is cool. And in the event of rook g5, this is where you could go in for a check on d8. And soon the queen is going to be won for the rook. So queen block, there's rook e8. And king stepping up, there would be rook to e7. So with a line like this, we don't care if the g pawn is won. We're running to f1 in this case. If you go to the edge, there'll be a perpetual check with the rook on g2 and g1. Yeah, these checks will run out in the end. The queen is going to be lost. Our king is cool here on e2. But how it plays out in this game, a nice positional one out of this Italian game. After queen takes knight here, black resigned. So what did you think of this one? Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.